Thank you so much for tuning in on another episode of Catch Up with Kestner. Appreciate everyone for tuning in today. I have a good friend of mine, Margaret, that will be joining us on today's episode. I've had a great opportunity to live with Margaret for the past couple years, and she's on to bigger things now, moving out of Hawaii back onto the States, over on the mainland. She's going to talk about a lot of her journey into law school and her passions behind her culture and her heritage, and just a lot of things that she's very passionate about. So I'm excited for today's call. Margaret, for the people that don't know who you are, explain or give a taste of who you are, what you're up to. We'll start off with that.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm super excited. So for people who don't know me, my name is Margaret Von Rozt. I was born in Honolulu, but I grew up in Modesto, California. So it's about like 2 hours inland from San Francisco. Let's see. Grew up in Modesto, so I'm half Filipino, half white, and on my Filipino side, I'm what's called like indigenous Ifugao, which I post about all the time if you ever find my Instagram, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more, so I won't go into it now. I went to UCLA for undergrad, and then right after undergrad, I did Teach for America with Kestner, and that's how we met. That's how we became roommates. So I got to teach in Hawaii for 2 years, and I taught special education for 7th grade. And then I moved to San Francisco, where I am now starting law school at UC Hastings. And then just like personal tidbits, like my quarantine hobbies so far have been reading, trying to paint, but I'm like kind of sucking at it lately. And then I'm trying to get back into sports, like when sports are like starting up again. I played a lot of tennis with my mom during the summer, and then I'm like a huge Bay Area sports fan. So I'm like excited that sports is back, and then I'm here like in SF. Yep. I'm also like nervous about sports being back for obvious reasons. But yeah, that's just a little about me, but I'm sure we'll get more into it.
Yep. Nice. So I've had the pleasure to see your growth over the past couple years of being a stranger, and then knowing like all of your desires and passions into the field that we're going to talk about today, which is law school. And so to start us off and give everyone a little bit of background, and even myself, I've seen your work over the past couple years of like leading up to law school, but describe your early journey in your passion to pursue law school.
Basically, like, why am I doing this, right? Which is
Sure.
So great. So since people don't know, this is actually my first week here. So like my first week of law school orientation. So not that anyone here has asked me that question, but it's something I'm reflecting on like all week. Like, am I doing the right thing? Like, why did I choose this career? Because it is a really hard one.
Right.
You know what's funny is I was like unpacking stuff over the summer, like at my mom's house, and I found I guess this like journal or something that we had to make for 4th grade or 5th grade. I forget which one. Okay. At the beginning of the year, they asked me like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said a teacher, which is adorable. And I didn't know that's what I wanted to do. And then we had to fill it out again at the end of the year, and they asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I put lawyer. So it's like really funny that I ended up doing both things.
Yep.
Yeah. So I've been reflecting a lot, like at what point did I know for sure that I wanted to go into law? And it's been something I've had to think about for a lot, so hopefully it's not a long-winded answer. Yeah, I don't know. I think it started with a lot of the traveling I did, like back and forth from the US to the Philippines. So my mom's entire family is still in Ifugao, which is a province in the Philippines. And I think just like the conditions there, like life there is very different. For anyone that's ever been to the Philippines or been to, you know, a country in the global South, like life there is very different. And I feel like that really politicized me at a young age when we would go back and forth. But I didn't know law was going to be the thing that would push me towards that until maybe college. I think college is when I got like, I knew for a fact that I didn't want to do med school, which was my first choice when I started undergrad. I got really into politics and really into policy. And so I kind of saw myself going into more like the public policy route. I had talked to like law school alum when I was like a freshman or a sophomore. And the way they talked about law school was that it was really terrifying. So I was like, I don't need this. I'm gonna do other things. But it wasn't really until in my last year of college, and then once I started teaching is when
Mhm.
I was really like, maybe I should do law. Like I had multiple people that were telling me that
Mhm.
the things that I wanted to do were very focused on advocacy. Like I'm very interested in policy, but I
Right,
still want to work with people. I still want to help people.
right, right,
And I guess because I've never really met any lawyers, like barely, like no one in my life is a lawyer. I don't really know
right.
anything about law. And so I didn't really realize just how much of the job of lawyering can be about being an advocate for people. In the same way that doctors help heal people, lawyers help solve problems for people.
Right, right.
So it took me until probably the end of college to realize it was a possibility. I didn't want to like really rely on it or think that it was really for me, and so
Mhm.
I went into teaching because to me teaching was like, okay, that's like very obvious how I can help kids, how I can help
Right,
families.
right.
And education was something I was always passionate about, clearly from a young age. And it wasn't until teaching, like my teaching job, where I was like, I have to be a lawyer. Like it just wasn't. It makes me sad to say, and we've talked about this so many
Yep.
times, but teaching wasn't enough. I
Yeah.
think in terms of like the type of help that I wanted to
Mhm.
give, like I knew that I had to go beyond the classroom and the ways that I could help students and their families. Like I could just see how policy and the law and what courts are able to do,
Right,
like
right.
the way they can still marginalize and how they don't do enough. I was like, I need to be in that room, I
Mhm.
guess. And so that's what pushed me to law, was actually all of my frustrations from working in special ed that just pushed me towards this current career. And I can't tell you exactly what I'm going to do in law yet, but it is very much focused on the idea of like, how can I be a better advocate for, people from my community and from communities like mine, and
Mhm.
just for people in general. So I think that answers your question. Sorry if that was long-winded or
Oh
anything.
no, not at all. I
It
mean,
was definitely a journey to figure out that this was the career that I wanted. And even then, I feel like it's probably going to change quite a bit.
a huge part of it too, I think, is I've always appreciated your strong sense of confidence in your identity. I think that's something that's not as common when we meet, people our age, right, in their mid 20s, for example. But you have always had a strong sense of identity and a strong sense of your cultural roots, and I feel like that, like having that historically bound to who you are, like played a big part in like your decisions of why you want to go into law school and kind of your confidence going into law school. Like you said, you're not exactly sure what degree to what route you want to take, but at the same time, you know what focus you want to enter that in. So I always knew that was something through our conversations that you were always really passionate about, not just serving like any community that you were a part of, but serving your community specifically, right? And representing your culture, which is like super dope. Um, I also really appreciate how, like, thinking through your experiences as a teacher, right? Teachers, tremendous worth, tremendous value, but also looking at who you were as a person at the time, there was something more, right? Because you always would talk about the political side of things, and how there's so much more to what goes into education, and what goes into equity and what goes into all these different policies. And just having that mindset and having that understanding of the political side was something that like I was learning from all the time from you. So it's like it was good to know that there was so much more out there that you felt like you could have impacted when it came to not just education, but when it came to serving different demographics, different communities. And I
Right.
feel like law is a very, very suitable place for you. So it's
I think
nice to hear that you are starting your first week of law school. So that's pretty awesome.
Thanks, man.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's it's definitely quite a journey, and our like whole conversations that we would have about teaching also kind of helped me understand too, because like your passion for teaching, and I know it wasn't something that you were like 100%
Yeah.
sure it was going
Yep.
to be your passion, and just I think the differences in our journeys as teachers too, like your experience with teaching where like it really fulfilled you in ways that it didn't quite fulfill me. And that's
Right.
not to say that teaching isn't a beautiful profession,
Of
because it
course.
is, but yeah, no, even just seeing how like the ways in which you felt empowered by it and the ways that I felt like I still needed to do more, that was really helpful for me too. So I on the other side of those conversations, it was also really great.
That's dope.
Yeah.
So I want to get more into your cultural identity. I know that's a huge part of who you are, and I love how passionate you are about talking about it. So I understand that when you're talking about your indigenous Filipino heritage and culture. It's an essential part of who you are, right? So speak about what it's like to educate someone that has never heard of Ifugao culture, and may group that culture with, seamlessly or mindlessly with other Filipino cultures, right? It's very easy to just put everything together and say, that's just part of Filipino culture. But speak about that.
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely some. It's so interesting that like you've met me at a point in my life where I was really coming into my own with my identity. Because if you had met me like in middle school or high school, maybe even beginning of college, like that's totally not who I was. So it's really so funny to hear myself being characterized in that way. But you're absolutely right. Like it is a big part of who I am. Put it in my law school personal statement. Like it's what I lead with now, and I think I'm better for it because of that. Um, but yeah, like trying to explain that part of my identity, it varies from group to group. Like I think when I'm talking to non-Filipinos, it's actually a little bit easier. So if someone isn't Filipino, like basically all I have to say is like my mom is from an indigenous group in the Philippines, and like that's obviously unique. Not completely unheard of. I mean, there's like native communities in other countries as well, like Mexico, Guatemala. And I know that we're starting to talk about those things more, which is why I feel like I can more comfortably bring that up with non-Filipinos. That part's easy. Like I can handle that. And I can handle like the tension of being like, because, being an indigenous person, like using the word indigenous means you're tied to a land, right? Like you're tied to your ancestral land, even through colonization. That's like the essential part of being indigenous. And I feel like that comes into such tension as someone who like, yeah, I have indigenous descent and heritage, but I also didn't grow up in Ifugao. I'm not from the Philippines. Like I was born and raised in the States. And I think that can be kind of hard for people to wrap their heads around. And it certainly was for me growing up. And it was really enforced by my trips back to Ifugao, back and forth, and like conversations with my family there who were like very adamant about the fact that I need to like put that first. So something that my grandfather on my mom's side used to tell me, he would always be like, you are Ifugao first before anything else, which was like a really unique thing to tell me as like the only mixed white, me and my brother are like the only half white ones in our family. Everyone else is for the most part full, I think, or at least full Filipino to some degree. So for him to tell us that, I think partly because we were mixed, partly because we were the only cousins outside of the Philippines, or his only grandchildren, I mean. But now it's like he passed away a couple years ago, so I feel like it's the only way I can really honor him is to like lead first with that. So to better answer your question in terms of how I educate people or what that's like, the difficulties come with educating other Filipinos about it, because you're Filipino and I'm sure you didn't really get like a major history lesson on the different indigenous groups. And that's
honestly, I don't know much either, so that's why I'm learning with you.
Yeah, no, and see, on one side, it's like most of the time when I educate people, it's the same thing as you, where it's like, I'm Filipino, but I didn't really know that was a thing, especially when we're like in diaspora, we're in like other countries and we're further removed from the Philippines. Like, unless your family is from one of those areas, like specifically the Cordilleras where my family's from, so it's like northern Luzon. I mean, most people don't know that. Like I've definitely, like there were teachers I worked with in Waiwa that I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm from Ifugao. And like they can, some understand, others completely don't. It just really depends on like their knowledge. So sometimes it's fine. Like sometimes it's, if anything, it's fun because I get to explain. Other times it comes with like some awkwardness. I think it just kind of depends on what their prior knowledge is. Definitely some folks from like my mom's generation, like it does get like pretty discriminatory. So a lot of indigenous groups in the Philippines, they're just not really seen as Filipino. It's like this weird, I guess, double-edged sword. So half the time they're seen as original Filipino, so like the first ones, right? But that means like they're only in the past. So they're treated like artifacts of like a pre-colonial era. On the other, like on the flip side of that, they're seen in the present, but then they're treated as like second-class citizens. And like if you look at their political situations, like currently in the Philippines, they have, they don't have access to education, to healthcare, to clean water. They have their lands grabbed from them. Like it's
Yep.
the host of issues that they face there is so completely different. But it mirrors a lot of the same issues that, like, if you look at like indigenous groups, like in Brazil, for
Mm-hmm.
example, like in the Amazon, they face a lot of similar issues when it comes to climate change and government like hostility when it comes to their land and stuff. So this is something that happens across the board for indigenous folks. It just can be hard to explain to somebody who doesn't know any better and possibly appropriates those cultures because it's like it's cool, it's interesting, it's really beautiful. But what happens a lot of times for me is like a lot of my educating comes from like someone who will have like a part of the culture, like they'll wear a necklace or get a tattoo, or they'll wear like a textile or something that's very clearly from an indigenous culture, but either they don't know that or like they don't know where their money goes when they support that. And what happens with that is like it's separating it from the culture that it's originally from the people that it's originally from. And something I feel like I have to ask people all the time is like, if you want to appreciate a culture that's not technically yours, that's one thing. But then what do you know about the people like that culture comes from? So if I personally wanted to buy like embroidery from like a Mayan community, like in Central America, cool. But I don't know anything about them. And that's also not my culture. So that's kind of the hard part. And I have like a whole talk coming up on it with like another like group of Igorots as well, who are like from the same region in the Philippines and go through the same issues in educating people. So I like completely understand that people just don't know any better. Like that's kind of the unique part of 2020 is that we're all in this online space, like learning together all the time. But it can be pretty frustrating too with like some people are very open-minded and like are ready to learn, and other people are very not interested in what I have to say.
Set in their ways.
Sorry, what?
Set in their ways. Yep.
Yeah, very set in their ways. And I think that comes with, it's like really touchy. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this in the Filipino American community, but I think there's like a really like strong desire to like connect to like whatever being Filipino means or being like authentically Filipino. And I think sometimes in that like, in striving to be as Filipino as you can be beyond like loving lumpia and adobo and all of that. I think sometimes it means people kind of reach out for the wrong things, and they reach out for parts of like different Filipino cultures that, I guess like they're Filipino and that they are in the Philippines, like Ifugao is, but the experiences of my Ifugao family members aren't the same as someone who grew up in Manila or who grew up in Cebu or other places, right? So it's about honoring the fact that indigenous peoples have faced different political struggles.
Yep.
I feel like that's the biggest part. And sometimes people get it, sometimes people don't. But yeah, so it's difficult, but it's also it's like a personal duty for me almost. Like I feel like I'm obligated to educate, because even though it's frustrating and I would love to just not say anything, and there are definitely people who do that. It's like my grandfather said, like I'm Ifugao first, so I have to tell people that, which means I have to educate, and that just comes with, whatever it comes with. But if that means that my culture survives and my people survive because of it, then it'll have been worth it.
See, I love hearing that because, being Filipino American myself too, it's very humbling in understanding there's so much more that I don't know, right? And that comes from a place of being honest with yourself. I love how you said that it's common for Filipinos to be very prideful of their culture, and to it's good to be to have a lot of pride in your backgrounds and in your culture, but at the same time too, it's like, to what extent does that pride take you, right? Does it come at a cost of minimizing it to simply lumpia and adobo, or right, or does it still value indigenous cultures and indigenous places around the Philippines, right? And taking the time to understand that. So I love having this conversation because I'm learning as I go with you and talking about just like places like Ifugao and all these other different cultures that honestly, like, I've never grown up hearing about, right? I hear about or just having parents from the Philippines. I feel like I have a lot of common experience with that Filipino American, being raised Filipino American, but at the same time too, there's so much more to the islands. There's so much more to the culture that is really like left unheard, and I think that's where it comes down to, like you said, the the indigenous part of it, of, the political side of how much appropriation and how much of our culture is diminishing over time. And, it's not just the Philippines, like it's very evident now in the times that we're living today. And I think that's also kind of the bittersweetness to it. It is the times that we're living in today, through all these different movements, is also bringing up a lot of pain over the
Yeah.
years, but at the same time too, it's bringing a lot of growth and a lot of knowledge to the table. Um, it's unfortunate that times like this had to go through the times that we're going through, for people to become educated, but at the same time too, appreciating those small moments where people are changing, right? For
Right.
whatever space they're in, people are changing. People are being more open-minded to some degree, in different areas, but just focusing on that different narratives and different stories are being supported by people that maybe you've never thought would support you.
Oh
So
yeah.
I really love that part, and just connecting it back to your identity. I love how you had that story, with was it your grandfather, or with,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
with Ifugao first, and then
Every-
everything else second. Like that's something that, like I can't connect to personally, right? I'm still learning more about my roots and learning more about where my parents came from, where my grandparents came from. But the
Mhm.
fact that was like instilled in you at such an early age, um, that's so cool, because you can live with that and you can grow from that, and you can keep your culture going, right? So it's very easy to just fall into the American westernized side of your culture, and saying that I'm proudly Filipino, which is not a problem, right? But there's so much more when it comes to saying that you're part Filipino.
Mhm.
Just understanding the deeper meaning of those roots is super important. So, like I said, I'm learning as I go, and so it's really humbling for you to like take the time to talk about that.
Of course. No, anytime. I freaking love talking about Ifugao, and I love talking about everything Filipino, no matter how frustrating it can
Mm.
be. But yeah, I mean it's a really big part of me. And every time I say I'm frustrated, I'm done with the Filipino community, I'm totally lying. Like I can't get away from it. I can't get enough of educating folks, and like so we can all like learn and grow together, like you said. Like it's a fun journey, even with all the hardships that come with it.
But what's nice is that like you were very honest, like when you said that when I complain about the Filipino community or when I get tired of it, like I mean those are coming from real places, or like real places in your heart, right?
Yeah.
It's good to be forgiving and understanding, but also at the same time, now more than ever, it's a time to like reflect on our true identities and truly where like all of our cultures interconnect. So that's like a huge part of being honest, with different Filipinos that are, going through different things, of taking the time to understand our culture and how we're all connected in that way. So, I mean, valid feelings, valid feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, early on, I know that we talked about teaching, and that's been a huge part of your journey, and obviously getting to see that over the past couple years have been really cool. I want you to talk about what has teaching, specifically, how has teaching changed your mindset of who you are heading into law school?
Wow. That's a big question. Ooh, hoo, hoo. Um, who I am going into law school. I think, oh God, there's just so many ways to answer this question. If anything, I think the shortest answer, and I will explain it, teaching just really affirmed me in who I am,
Mm,
and like gave me a confidence I've never had in my life. And I know you got to witness that, but there's like also something about like not even just the whole job itself, but just the act of being in front of a bunch of kids every single day and all those micro decisions we have to make
yeah,
constantly, and like juggling so many different I guess cases, but really they're individuals, they're students and their
yeah,
families, juggling so much at once, but also like trying to do the best for them. I mean, like I'll never be the same person again because of
right,
teaching. It taught me things I already knew about myself. Like I thought of myself as confident and compassionate and a good advocate, and I mean political for one thing. But it just brought out more of those parts of me in a way
mm,
that was more complete, in a way that was more mature and developed, I think. And I think because teaching like obviously did force me to grow up as like any post grad job would. since I went right after graduation. But I mean, like when I think of it, like teaching just like brings like just thinking about that time, even if it was short lived and it wasn't completely joyful at the time, it brings a lot of joy to my heart to think about it, because it just pushed me into the person I need to be in order to be able to go to law school, to think law school was possible, to think that it was needed, to think that my voice was needed in this field. I wouldn't have got there without teaching, because, and I think I posted this on my Instagram a couple times, and I've definitely brought it up with students, is that working with kids, like they deserve nothing less than my best every single day. And because of that, as draining as that is, I had to be my best. And now I feel like I'm this better version of myself, like not even just as an advocate or, you know, as like someone going into a career, but just a better person, because I became a teacher, and because I wanted to be the best for my students. And I wasn't the best every day, but on the days where I wasn't my best, I felt it. And I knew I wasn't doing my best. And I felt there was a guilt in that too, because I was like, these kids deserve everything, and I can never give them everything, but I have to at least try. And I don't know if like maybe law will be like that, but I don't know if I'll ever have another experience like that again, where you know, teaching just made me into the person I needed to be. Like it was definitely like trial by fire every single day, and it was like it was being forged through fire, definitely. But even just like my own political beliefs, like there's definitely things that I believed when I left college, and teaching just like it just showed me everything that I had taught, or everything that I had learned in college, everything I told other people about like how the world works and how it's like not just, and it's unfair and it's inequitable. And I knew all of those things going in, but then to witness it firsthand, to try to operate in these different systems and being so frustrated all of the time that I couldn't do enough, teaching taught me that too, that you know that is part of it. And now I have all these like individual experiences to explain the things that I saw. Like a lot of what I talked about in college, or what pushed me towards education, was like talking about the school to prison pipeline, and like what it means to like have this culture of punishment in schools, and how that negatively affects like certain demographics of students, right? I don't think I ever truly understood that until I could put names and faces to those types of stories. So like when I wrote my law school personal statement, it's like I couldn't even talk about teaching in a broad way, because all I could think was of these like individual stories of like I couldn't do enough for this one kid, like the system failed this other kid. Like it's so systemic. That's kind of the sadder part of what teaching taught me, is that there's just a lot that we haven't dealt with. And I know the pandemic is doing the same thing, but if I'm talking about just myself as a person, like teaching just made me the person I needed to be, and brought out the best parts of myself so that I could move on and continue to serve in other ways. And for that, I'll forever be grateful to teaching, as difficult as it was. I miss it every day. Today I only talked about teaching with my law school classmates, and they're like getting to know me, and they're like, oh, so you used to be a teacher? And I just found myself talking about teaching for like 20 minutes, which was great.
Once a teacher, always a teacher.
I was just about to say, once an educator, always an educator. Like it just never goes away. It's always a part of you.
Two things I really like from that. The first one is, I love how teaching taught you to be selfless, right? It's a very selfless career. Always learning to put your students first, and sometimes putting yourself last. And I think that's kind of the downside of teaching that really goes unheard of, is that you put so much of your effort and your time and your mind or your money or your resources into the people that you care about, which is your students and the families, that a lot of it is at the expense of your own sanity sometimes. So, but with that, focusing on the positive side for you is through knowing that you've always wanted to put the best for your students, that, like you said, you forged in the fire, right? You were making yourself a better person through making other people better. So I think that was really, really nice, to just connecting it back to the students of how, we always say that we're teachers, but we're also students. And I know like that's really cliche, but we do learn from our students, and absolutely. You are learning how to be a better person by thinking, how can I be better for them? And that's a crazy thing to think about as a teacher, because we're so used to this idea that we've got to be the best for our kids all the time, and we have to mold these perfect citizens. But at the same time too, we're coming in a place where we're not perfect, but we're trying to be perfect for them. And through that process of trying to be better for each other, we just become better people. So I think that's a really beautiful thing to recognize as a teacher. So that's the first one. And I loved how you said that through teaching, talking, I guess, a little bit more about the negative side, it's um, brought of things that weren't in light before you went into teaching, right? So when we're thinking about systemic problems, right, and how the system fails so many students and so many kids in different ways, right? You mentioned the school to prison pipeline idea. This like paradigm behind teaching, it's very that conversation is not held enough, I feel like. And for you to recognize that through the process of becoming a teacher, it's not just going into the classroom teaching about content in math or science or social studies, grading and talking to parents. Like that's like not even, that's just the surface of it. It's like how are you advocating for certain groups of students that have been marginalized or have been oppressed, or come from these families of, you know, of different situations. Like how are you tackling that? How are you making that situation more livable for them? Not necessarily better, because I mean we only have so much power, but how are you playing a role in making their lives a little bit better, more safer, less traumatic, right? And so this side of teaching is really something that, you know, like you said, I never thought about too before becoming a teacher. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this never thought of that side of becoming a teacher. But at the same time too, it's not just about education, right? It's how does that system play into all these different institutions? Education is just one of them, but
Education
how
is just one.
it is.
And that was the like one of the most wild things about
Mm,
teaching is that like it's like I know these things. Like you can learn all you want in ethnic studies class about systemic racism, but when you work in the system, it is like completely different from what you learn in a classroom. Like I
definitely.
mean, it was essentially what I learned, but I think like one of my biggest lessons. And I'm gonna share this because it was so
Please
mind-blowing to me.
go for
Um, I remember talking with my co-teacher my first year about, you know, how I couldn't wrap my mind around all of the inequity that we saw. And of course I found like a very like neutral way to describe that because I mean she was like on the older side, but she was a great teacher.
yeah.
Um, and I remember asking her like how money is like distributed to different schools. So
Mm,
something that I learned in one of my sociology classes, and for people who don't know and haven't listened, like in California at least, like there's like property taxes and like the way money is sent from the government to schools is actually like pretty unequal, especially in California. And so I was curious if Hawaii had the same problem, and it's not quite the same.
mm,
Um, but I remember, and this is my point, is that in undergrad I thought, you know, if we just make sure that every school has enough money, right? If we just make it equitable so that obviously the schools that are like Title I schools or like underserved schools
right.
have enough money, then it'll be fine. It wasn't until I worked at my school that I realized like you could throw all the money into this school that you want. It will not solve the problems. And there's something about the way the system works that is it's just inherently designed to fail certain kids
Right.
and to make sure that certain kids get suspended or punished or you know just not like there's nothing you can do to change that. I think there's individual teachers, like I'd like to think I tried, and
Yeah.
there's definitely some students that told me I did a good job,
Yeah.
but save for like that one or two unique teachers who will look out for that one kid and is like, I believe in you, you're going to make it. The entire rest of the system is designed to tell plenty of kids, especially Black and brown students, that they're not able to succeed no matter what they do. And so
Mm,
of course they fall into other behaviors and they're like criminalized at such a young age.
right.
Completely blew my mind. I had no clue just how difficult it would be at every single step of the way in the system for a student, for a parent, even for a teacher. Like, I mean, teachers, they can perpetuate it, but even for a teacher who wants to go against the grain, it's really hard. But that's also why I'm really grateful I did it, because I don't think I could have ever really understood like systemic issues if I didn't have those individual interactions and experiences. And like you said, like education is just one example. I am so sure it is just as difficult and problematic in every other sector of society. But I think that also shows that like, you know, if we have all these societal problems, for me, that's when I started to ask like, how can we like solve those problems? How
Yep.
can we make the world a better place, even not just in education. But
Right.
yeah, teaching like brought so many learning experiences for me.
Definitely.
And like you said, like even though we were teachers, we were learning every day on the job at the same time as the kids were.
Definitely. So thinking about that and, connecting that back to your passion and your current lifestyle, right? Focusing on law school. Like you said, you've learned so much over the past couple of years, but talk about what you hope to get out of law school then. I know that you just started, and I know it's like we start off as like freshmen in college all over again of like exploring and finding these different communities and relearning ourselves basically. But talk about that law school aspect of what do you hope to get out of it?
Well, I mean, everything that I've learned so far in like my first couple days is that the point of law school is to think like a lawyer. And so I hope that, law school will mold me into the type of thinker I need to be to solve really big societal problems. And that's why I applied and that's why I'm here, because I don't think lawyers have all the answers. I don't think being a lawyer is the only way to, address inequity. I think teachers get to do that every day. But I do think that law school will give me the skills that I need to be able to address the issues that I care about. And on that note, I also hope that law school will push me towards the one issue that I really need to work on, or like where's my best place to serve. I haven't figured that out yet. I don't know if you and I ever had this conversation, but the reason why I ultimately decided to apply to law school is actually because I went to church one day while we were in Hawaii. And then I just was sitting there and I just heard the message and I was like, that's it, I have to go. I don't know what it was. I think it was the priest was saying, like, God calls you to do mighty deeds. And like, I don't really talk about my faith that much, but that moment was like so watershed for me. It was like in the middle of teaching and I was in my first year and I was so frustrated. But then I heard that and something in me just clicked that like my frustrations have to be taken to the next level.
Wow.
So I genuinely hope that that's what law school will help me do, is figure out how to take everything I've learned and hopefully make society better for everyone.
Right.
But I'm also like I'm hopeful, but I also have a ton of faith that that's what it is, because I know God put me here for a reason.
Right.
And so I just hope I can fulfill that reason and that purpose to the
Definitely.
extent that I'm supposed to. I'm excited for that, even if whether that's education again or if it's something completely different. I know that I'm in the right place, and that's a really special feeling. So I'm just kind of looking forward to the ride at this point, and looking forward to see where this journey will take me next.
Nice.
Yeah.
Crazy. And I think I remember that story. I
Yeah.
remember being a part of that. And look at you now. Here you are, San Francisco, UC Hastings. Crazy.
I know.
All right. So imagine yourself, Marge, at the table. You're at a table. It's dark. The light in the middle is about to shine. Light shines, and across the table, you see 18-year-old Margaret. What do you say to her?
Oh, wow. You're going to do okay. You're going to do okay. You're not going to have all the answers, but you're going to do okay. Yeah. I could expand on that, but
Go for it. Go for it.
yeah. And when I think back to 18-year-old me, she just was so excited about college. She also had no plan. Like,
It's real. Real.
I mean, I was pre-med, so I thought I had a plan. And quite honestly, if I look back on it, I probably chose pre-med because, and Rihanna knows this, it's like med school is like, like your entire life is set out for you till you're 30 at least.
Yeah.
Like my high school experiences, like what the things I had gone through in my family in high school, were really difficult. And so by the time, so when I was 16 is when my father passed away, or right before I turned 16. And so for like a good year and a half, so probably my entire junior year of high school, I didn't have a plan. Like I quite honestly wasn't interested in living. And so I didn't know what adult me would look like, because at that point I was just trying to make it to the next day.
Right.
And so I remember feeling at 18 when I was like super excited to go to UCLA, and also very terrified that I just didn't know who I would be in 5 years, who I would be in 10 years. So it was really cool that like here I am 6 years later, about to turn 24. Like I am well on my way. Like I honestly shocked. Like I think 18-year-old me would be very, very surprised that this is where I ended up. This is this is where I am and what I'm doing. Like, but she would be incredibly excited and proud. Yeah, if I could tell 18-year-old me that, it'd be like, dude, you got this. Like, enjoy the time, but you're also gonna be okay. Like, you don't have to have the answers yet.
For my 18-year-olds listening, encouragement in knowing that things will work out the way that they're supposed to work out, having faith in yourself. I know it's really easy to hear that and not so much believe it, but taking it from everyone that was 18-year-old once or just a young adult, everything plays out the way it's supposed to play out. So keep
Absolutely.
doing you. Keep doing you. Well, Margaret, I appreciate you. I appreciate all the moments that we've shared here in Hawaii. I know that you are going to do great things at UC Hastings. It's very fitting to who you are and what you stand for as a person. I know that it's very complementary to your values and just what you hope to accomplish in the world. So it's really dope to just see that you're in this environment. You have your own place, and you're really just finding yourself in this mold of making yourself better for other people through law. So I'm excited to hear what law has for you in store. I know it's so early on in your law career, but there's so many memories I can't wait to hear. So keep doing you. Appreciate you. Keep working hard. I know you'll do great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was super awesome. It's so nice to catch up.
Yes. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Check the website for more information and resources from Margaret. Pretty dope stuff. Until the next time, Margaret, I'll see you. Bye.